Hello and welcome to another video by Perfect Scores. This is Preetinder Kaur and we are doing a series of videos on 11th grade biology. So far we have done information on the physiology of a plant and we've covered two main organs, that is the root and the stem. So in this video we are going to start off with a very important organ for the photosynthesis, in fact the most important vegetative organ for photosynthesis, that is going to be the leaf. The leaf is a generally flattened structure that is born on the stem. It develops at the node and it also has a bud in its axil. And this bud, the axillary bud, it later develops into a branch. So this bud will later become a branch. Leaves, they originate from the shoot apical meristems and they're arranged in an acropetal order. That means more leaves are there in the beginning and the new leaves, they usually come at the top where more height is there. Now a typical leaf, it consists of three main parts. One is the leaf base, one is the petiole, and the other one is the lamina, the plain surface. Now the leaf is attached to the stem at the leaf base. So this is where the leaf and the stem, they get attached to each other. And sometimes at this leaf base you may be able to see two small leaf-like structures called stipules. So I'm going to draw a diagram. Let's suppose this is the stem and this is where the leaf is starting. And over here you may see some small leaf-like structures. This is known as the stipule. This is known as the leaf base. And the bud that I'm talking about, this axillary bud, this is present over here. And this structure over here is known as the petiole, the stalk-like structure. Now in monocotyledons, the leaf base is expanding into a sheath that covers the stem, either partially or wholly. It's like a cover. Sometimes in legumes, the leaf base can become swollen. So that is known as a pulvinus. That is only there in legumes. Now the petiole, it helps to hold the leaf blade to light so that maximum light can shine on the leaf. And usually they are long and thin and flexible that can even flutter in the wind. So it also helps to cool the leaf and brings fresh air to the leaf surface. Then the final thing is the lamina, which is this leaf that we know as. It's also known as the leaf blade. It's green and it has lots of veins and veinlets. Usually there's a middle prominent vein that is known as the midrib. And then there are certain other veins. Now the veins are just like veins in the human body. They give rigidity to the leaf blade, plus they act as channels of transport for water and the other materials. Now the shape, the margin, the apex, the surface, and the extent of incision on the lamina, it varies in different leaves. So that is what we are going to do ahead after doing venation. Now venation is simply the arrangement of the veins and veinlets of the leaf. So you just need to know that there are two kinds of venations. So let me make a note here. If they run like a network, like this, that is known as reticulate. But if they are parallel, like in parallel lines, it is simply known as parallel. Usually dicotyledonous plants, they have the reticulate venation, and the monocots, for example maize, they have parallel venation. So that is an important characteristic in which you can differentiate the leaves of those two kinds of plants. Coming to the types of leaves. Now a leaf is known to be very simple when the lamina is the entire surface, or even if there are incisions, they do not touch the midrib. But once the incisions of the lamina, they reach till the midrib, breaking it into a number of leaflets, that leaf is known as a compound leaf. Now in that case, a bud is there in the axil of the petiole in both the simple and the compound leaves, but not in the axil of the leaflets. It's only in the axil of the main leaf. For instance, now the compound leaves may also be of two types. They can be pinnately. Alright, for example, this is the stem. Okay, this is the stalk, the petiole. Here is the axillary bud, and here you can find the stipules. So you're going to have a leaf that has further small leaflets. Now remember, each of these leaflets is not going to have an axillary bud. Only the main leaf, that is over here, you're going to have the axillary bud, not in these leaflets, not in the single individual leaflet. So that is pinnately, or it can be a case of palmately compound leaf also. For example, this is the petiole on the stalk with the axillary bud, and this is how the leaflets would be arranged, all on a common point. And these all were arranged on different lengths of the stalk. Now the compound leaves, when they are there in the pinnately compound leaf, this common axis, this is known as the rachis. So that is the difference in pinnately and palmately. So I'll give you examples also. For this, a good example is going to be the neem leaf, and for this it's going to be the silk cotton. So that is about the compound leaves. So usually the leaves are of these two types, pinnately and palmatory. But further what we are going to do is going to be phyllotaxy. Phyllotaxy is an important thing that you must know. That is the pattern of arrangement of leaves. It can be alternate, it can be opposite. In alternate, you have leaves like this, but in opposite, you have leaves like this. So they are on the opposite edges of a stem. Here they are on the alternate edges of the stem. So we are going to discuss that in detail now. So this is what we have just done, that phyllotaxy is usually of two types, alternate and then opposite. So we are going to do a little bit more further into this discussion. A third type is there, that is known as whorled. In that, more than two leaves, they arise at a node. For example, if this is the node and one leaf is here, one is here, one is here, one is here, or another one is there at the back. So at this very node, more than two leaves are coming together. Like in the case of opposite, two leaves were coming at one node. In case of alternate, one leaf is there at one node. In case of whorled, it's going to be more than two leaves at one node. So that is about the phyllotaxy in short. And coming to the modifications of the leaves, which is an important thing. How do the leaves they get modified? Now in case of leaves, usually the main function is to perform photosynthesis. But sometimes they can perform other functions also, in which case they need some modifications to go by. And one of the important modifications is when the leaves they become tendrils. Now we've already done the case where the stem it becomes a tendril, for example in grapevine. But sometimes the leaves can also become tendrils for climbing. For example in peas, they can even become spines. For example in a cactus. And in some plants like the acacia, the leaves are very small. And when the leaves they die, because they are short-lived, the petioles become green expanded structures and then they synthesize food. In some other cases, the leaves can be used, for example, in carnivorous plants, in insectivorous plants like the pitcher plant or the Venus flytrap. That is to trap the food. So those are the different ways in which these leaves can be modified. And that is all about the leaf. The next thing that we are about to do in this video is going to be the inflorescence. So let's get started with that. Now inflorescence refers to the flower, which is nothing but a modified shoot. And in this, what happens is that the shoot apical meristem gets changed into a floral meristem. So whatever development takes place is going to be in the direction of a flower. The internodes, they do not elongate, and the axis, it gets condensed. Now the apex can produce various kinds of floral appendages at successive nodes instead of leaves. So instead of leaves, now the flowers are given. And when the shoot's tip transforms into a flower, it's usually solitary. That means only one flower is going to be there on that shoot. So that is about how the flower comes into being. Now, how is the flower related to inflorescence? Inflorescence is nothing but how the flowers are arranged on a floral axis. Now, whether the axis gets converted into a flower or it continues to grow, two kinds of inflorescences are defined. One is racemose, the other one is cymose. In racemose, the main axis, it continues to grow, and the flowers are borne laterally into an acropetal succession. But in cymose, the main axis terminates in a flower. And growth is limited because of that, and the flowers are borne in a basipetal order. So the example is, for example, in this shoot, this becomes the flower, and in this, lateral growth is there. The main axis terminates and you have flowers on these ends like this. So that is the difference between racemose and cymose. And sometimes in cymose, from these also further three, you can get, let's say, extensions, and then from this also like that. So if I draw a diagram over here, so these three are the main stalks, and then you have those leaves over here, the stipules, and then they further develop into three further kinds, where you have a flower at this end and a flower at this end. Similarly, this one further develops into three more types. So flower at this end, a flower at this end, a flower at this end, and this one also grows into three further types: flower at this end, flower at this end, flower at this end. So this is what is cymose, and racemose would be just simple: the flower at the top and the leaves below. So that is the difference between racemose and cymose. Now the next thing that we are about to do is description of the flower in detail. Now in case of angiosperms, flower is meant for sexual reproduction, and that is the reproductive unit. Now a typical flower has four different kinds of whorls arranged successively on the swollen end of a stalk. So let me put all this information here. Four kinds of whorls arranged successively on the swollen end of the stalk or the pedicel, and that is called the thalamus or the receptacle. And these four kinds of whorls, these are the calyx, the corolla, androecium, and gynoecium. Now the calyx and the corolla, these are accessory organs. While androecium and gynoecium are the reproductive organs. Now in flowers like the lily, the calyx and the corolla are not distinct. They're both termed as perianth. Both are similar and they are known as the perianth. Now when a flower has both the androecium and the gynoecium, it is known as bisexual. And if it has only androecium or if it has only the gynoecium, it is known as unisexual. When it comes to the symmetry of a flower, the flower may be actinomorphic, that means radial symmetry, or it can be zygomorphic. That is bilateral symmetry. Now what exactly are these two terms, actinomorphic and zygomorphic? Actinomorphic is when a flower can be divided into two equal radial halves in any plane passing through the center. For example, in case of a mustard flower or in case of a chili flower, that is called actinomorphic. Two equal radial halves in any plane. But if it can be divided into two similar halves only in one plane, that is called zygomorphic. The example is a pea plant. And sometimes there are other kinds of flowers that are asymmetric, that do not have any symmetry. It cannot be divided into two similar halves by any vertical plane. For example is canna. Coming to the number of appendages, if the appendages are in multiples of 3, you can call the flower trimerous. For example, if it has 3 petals or 6 petals or 9 petals. If it is in multiples of 4, it's called tetramerous. For example, 4 petals, 8 petals, 12, like that. And if it is present in multiples of 5, it's called pentamerous. The flowers with bracts reduced leaf found at the base of the pedicel are called bracteate. If bracts reduced leaf is found at the base of the pedicel, it's called bracteate. And if not present, it's called ebracteate. The next thing that you need to know is that how the flowers are described into a few more different categories on the basis of the position of the calyx, corolla, and the androecium. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some figures for. So these are 4 different kinds of flowers that I have drawn. The first one is known as hypogynous. I'll also describe and give you the difference between them. The middle 2 ones, they are known as perigynous. This one and this one as well. And the last one is known as epigynous. Now in the case of hypogynous, the gynoecium applies the highest position. So let me write it like this and label this. This applies the highest position, which is the gynoecium. And in such cases, for example, we have mustard, China rose, and brinjal. The ovary in such a case is known to be superior. And if the gynoecium is situated in the center and other parts are located on the rim of the thalamus, almost at the same level, that is called perigynous. In this case, it is said to be half superior, half inferior. so half inferior, and it is supposed to be located in the center and everything is around the rim. And the example of this is plum, rose, and peach. In case of epigynous flowers, the margin of the thalamus is upwards, it encloses the ovary completely, gets fused with it, and the other parts of the flower, they are arising above the ovary, over here. So the ovary is supposed to be inferior as compared to the other cases. For example, in guava and cucumber, even in the florets of sunflower. So that is how you can have different kinds of flowers based on the position, relative positions of the four whorls that we've just done. The calyx, the corolla, and finally the androecium and the gynoecium. The next thing that is important and that we need to do is parts of a flower. So we already know there are four parts, so we are going to discuss each one of them in detail. We have the calyx, the corolla, and then we have the androecium and the gynoecium. So we'll discuss each one of them in detail. Coming to the first one, the calyx. Now that is the outermost whorl, and the members are known as sepals. Generally they are green, lifelike. The calyx, depending on these sepals, can be of two types. If the sepals are united, it is known as gamosepalous. If they are separate, it is known as polysepalous. So that is about the calyx. Now coming to the corolla, the members of the corolla are known as petals. And usually they are very bright and colorful so that they can attract insects for pollination. Now just like sepals, corolla can also be gamopetalous. So I don't need to discuss again why it's called gamopetalous. That's because the petals are stuck to each other, they're united. Or it can be polypetalous. Now the shape and color, it varies. It can be in the form of a tube, bell-shaped, funnel-shaped, or it can be wheel-shaped. Now estivation is there, that is the mode of arrangement of the sepals or petals, and that is something that we will be doing after we discuss the androecium and the gynoecium in little brief time. So you'll be doing estivation also. Estivation is nothing but how the sepals and the petals are arranged with respect to other members of the whole. And coming to the androecium, androecium is composed of, so let me put it here, stamens. Each stamen, it has a stalk or a filament and an anther. Usually the anther is bilobed and each lobe has two chambers. So this is the stalk or the filament and this is the anther which has two lobes. Each lobe is known as the pollen sac. And the pollen grains are produced in the pollen sacs. Sometimes you have a sterile stamen also that does not produce any pollen. That is known as a staminode. The stamens can be united with other parts of the flower, for example petals, or they can be united among themselves. When they are attached to petals, they are known as epipetalous. When they are attached, when they are free, they are called polyandrous. And sometimes the stamens are united into a bunch or a bundle. In that case, monoadelphous. Sometimes it can be two bundles, that is diadelphous, More than two petals, that will become polyadelphous, and like that. And then coming to gynoecium, which is the last part. So gynoecium is the female, you can say, the reproductive organ, and it's made up of one or more carpels. Now a carpel has three parts. Let me draw a line over here. Carpel has three parts: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Ovary is the enlarged part on which you have the tube-like structure called the style is the receptive, that actually connects the receptive part, which is the stigma, so that can receive the pollen grains. Now each ovary has one or more ovules that are attached to a cushion-like structure known as the placenta. Now, when each ovary has, let's say, more than one carpels are present in a flower, they may be free from each other. For example, in the lotus and the rose, they are called apocarpus. When they are free, when they are fused, they are called syncarpus. Once the fertilization takes place, the ovules, they develop into seeds, and the ovary develops into the fruit. Now coming to the ovary, now in various cases the ovules can be arranged within the ovary. That different kinds of arrangement, that is called placentation. And that is what we are going to do just after we cover estivation in detail, because these two are a little more detailed topics. But so far what you can see over here is parts of a flower. You have the calyx, that is the outermost member with sepals that can be united or separate. Then comes the corolla, whose members are petals. They can be gamopetalous or polypetalous, and we will discuss the different kinds of arrangements, which is estivation. Then androecium, which consists of the stamens with pollen sacs in their anther, and if it's sterile, it's called staminode. The petals are fused with stamens. In that case, it's called epipetalous. Otherwise, the stamens can be free, polyandrous, or they can be grouped into one bunch, monoadelphous, two bunches, diadelphous, many bunches, polyadelphous. Coming to gynoecium, which is the female reproductive part that consists of the carpel, having three parts: stigma, style, and ovary. In the ovary, you have ovules that are stuck to a placenta, and it can be apocarpus if the multiple carpels are free from each other, and syncarpus if they are all jointed into one single entity. So the next thing that we have to do is going to be estivation. Now, as I told you earlier, estivation is all about arrangement of the different petals or the sepals. So I'm going to draw 5 diagrams in this case, and those will give you the 5 different kinds of estivation. Now the first diagram that you can see here is in the case when the sepals or the petals in a whorl, they just touch each other at the margin, they do not overlap. So that is known as valvate. Now in the second case, one margin of the appendage overlaps that of the next one, and it's just like a chain. The example is that of cotton and in China rose. This is known as twisted. Now in this case, the margins of the petals or the sepals, they are overlapping one another, but not in any particular direction. There's nothing fixed. For example, in the case of a gulmohar flower, the estivation is called imbricate. Now the fourth case, you can see it's a little different. It's used in the pea flowers and the bean flowers. There are 5 petals. The largest one is called the standard. It overlaps 2 lateral petals. So this one is known as a standard. The 2 lateral petals, they're known as wings. And they in turn overlap the smallest anterior petals known as the keel. This type of estivation is known as vexillary or papilionaceous. So these are the four usual kinds of estivation that are found in flowers. The next thing that we have to do is placentation. Now these are the 5 common types of placentation that you can find: marginal, axile, parietal, free central, and basal. Now through the example and through a little bit of diagrams, I'm going to explain you what are these types. Now marginal is just like in the case of pea. So you have these ovules that are arranged in a stalk-like structure in a kind of a line, and then this is the cover on it. So that is marginal. Now what happens in case of axile is it's just like the axle of a car. These are the ovules. Two ovules here and two ovules here. And this is the structure. It's a bad diagram, but I hope you're getting the point. It's supposed to be round. So like this. This becomes just like the axle of a car. So axile. In parietal ones, the ovules are at the corners. Like this. And like this. In case of free central, for example, in the case of a lemon, they're all at the center. Or apples or oranges. And this is the outside part. And the last one, which is called a basal, it is located like this. So now I think it will be clear that in marginal, the placenta is like a ridge along the ventral suture of the ovary. The ovules are usually in the form of 2 rows, for example in pea. Now in axile, the placenta is axial and the ovules are attached. It's a multilocular ovary. That means you have these 3 chambers over here. For example, in tomato and in the case of lemons also. In parietal placentation, the ovules are in the inner wall of the ovary, or it can be in the outer part. Ovary is one chambered, but it can become two chambered also because of there can be a formation of a false septum. For example, in the case of mustard. Now, and sometimes the ovules are there on the central axis and there is no differentiation. For example, in primrose, the septa is totally absent. The placenta is known as free central. And coming to the basal placentation, it develops at the base of the ovary and one ovule is only attached, for example, in the case of sunflower. So that is all about the placentation you need to know. And that is all that we'll be doing in this video regarding the leaf and the fruit. So do watch the next video that is based on the fruit in detail. So far we have covered the leaf, the root, and we've also done the stem and the flower. So thank you so much for watching this video.